On Thursday evenings, we podcast. Welcome to another episode. And today's podcast episode, I was not even really planning to do this. It kind of just popped in my head. I didn't have any show notes prepared. In fact, I don't really have a lot of time to actually prepare any real show notes for just about anything, really. I really can kind of prep a few weeks of topics or episodes and then kind of get into them. Nonetheless, today's podcast episode is just kind of popped in my head, and so it's going to happen. And I'm going to call this, How Do You Handle Disagreements? Now, again, I wasn't planning on doing this, so I do not have extensive notes. It's a few different lines, you probably can't even see it. And for those of you listening, you definitely can't even see it. All I'm running off of at this particular point are just prompts. That's all I want to work off of is prompts. Something to propel me forward into having a conversation with you, the listener, about specific subjects. In this case, how do you handle disagreements? We're going to break it down into specific portions of your life. Because we indeed do compartmentalize our life. If we were just talking about the various things that we do on a regular or daily basis, then we would say our life. But oftentimes, if something happens at work, what do we say? It happened at work. If something happens in our personal life, then we say something happens within our personal life, and it happens to us. That's completely separated from work, which could also be completely separated from family in a lot of ways, because we can compartmentalize it. And when we compartmentalize it, we're able to analyze what's going on here in reality. What is taking place? Are we at an impasse? Has something happened that we can't actually get over or get through or put behind us? Indeed, there are. There are some things that when we encounter them, there is an impasse between us and somebody else. And now we have a disagreement that we're unable to, at least to a certain degree, overcome. How do we deal with that? What do we do? Far from having all of the answers, I'm just going to tell you a few of the things that I have either lived through or found out during, my time, whether it's at work or whatever the case may be, in the various areas that we're going to talk about. And when we're done, I hope to at least have given you a few tips and tricks on how to handle disagreements when it comes to these various subsets of ideas that we're going to talk about. So the first one that we're going to talk about the personal life, but I want to break it up just a little bit. And we're going to first talk about family. When we're talking to our family, is it likely that we're going to agree on everything? No. No two people agree on 100% of every single thing on the face of the planet. So, because that is true, we are going to have disagreements. It's just par for the course. So, what do we do with those disagreements? How do you overcome them? And how important, and this is I want to make sure that this distinction is laid out from the jump. How important are the disagreements? The varying levels of said disagreement directly correlate with how important that person is. So when it comes to family, then, we start talking about how to handle disagreements. Well, what I would say is, first off, what am I disagreeing with that person over? There's an old saying that when you get married, you pick and choose your battles. Do you want to be right all the time? Or do you want to have peace? You may disagree with somebody at the family level, in that family space. Is it worth bringing this up? And I suppose in a lot of ways, this is something that you learn with age. But for young people listening, one of the takeaways for you is, outside of the fact that we've got a whole sub-series on lies that we tell young people, is if you have somebody that is talking around or to you and they're giving you some sound advice, pick and choose your battles. You don't have to be right about everything, or at least you don't have to be vocal about it. They're offering you wise counsel, because far too many people prioritize being right over their relationships. And this is especially detrimental at the family level, because no matter what you do, that's still going to be your mom, that's still going to be your dad, it's still going to be your brothers or your sisters or your aunts, whatever relation you happen to be. And to the degree that you are, if it's a nuclear family relation, right? Your brothers or sisters, parents, or perhaps even worse, right? Your spouse, then you have to think long and hard about, first up, is this disagreement actually worth bringing up? Some of them are. But for the person that continually brings up even the most minute, the minor disagreements, you inevitably become and turn into that old story, the boy who cried wolf. Every single thing that we talk about, every single minute, small disagreement you bring up, so that if you bring up something significant, you're not taken seriously. That is not where you want to be. And so at first, when it comes to family, you weigh it out in the balance. What is your relationship to this person in your family? And is whatever you're disagreeing about worth that relationship? That's not for me to say. That's for you to evaluate. That's for you to weigh it out. That's for you to try and gather as much information as you can about whatever you happen to be disagreeing on, as well as how well do you actually value that relationship. Is this something that you're willing to throw years, and quite frankly, sometimes many times decades away, just because of a minor or insignificant disagreement? So tread lightly when it comes to family. The second thing that I would say is, to what degree are you disagreeing about? We have a disagreement. In other words, we have a disagreement. We're coming to an impasse. And now we've weighed it out. Okay, well, it's still a disagreement that I want to discuss. I don't want to say have it out, but I want to actually have a conversation. Let's sit down. Let's talk about this specific disagreement. Okay. Now you're there. Now the next step is going to obviously be, to what degree do you disagree with them on it? Maybe it's a disagreement where there are small little areas, small little nuggets, small little things that you disagree on. Or is it something very large? Something that you feel extremely passionate about and is actually worth the potential to damage that relationship. So once you've weighed it all out in the balance, as far as your need to be right and is this relationship worth it, all right, to what degree do you disagree? In a specific point, are you lockstep in with somebody about 80% of the time on whatever issue we're talking about? And is that other 20% actually worth discussing and, quite frankly, arguing over to a degree? Again, this is not something that I can answer for you. Only you can answer for you. But the same caution applies. tread lightly. I have known far too many people whose family relationships have been ruined over what people discover years later are insignificant disagreements. Insignificant. And while we can always have another conversation, and we can always debate some more, and we can always sit and have what I hope is civil discourse, what I cannot get is my time back. And that time lost with your relatives, your loved ones, is time lost. You can't get it back. And so before we start, moving on to the various other aspects of your life, my advice is to tread lightly. Consider just how important those relationships and your loved ones really are. And are they serious enough to not only throw away years, but to discard what's perceived to be years in the future that you will no longer be able to come together because of this oftentimes petty disagreement. In the end, when it comes to family, not only do I advise that you tread lightly when it comes to disagreements, I would also say to seriously consider what you're actually disagreeing over. Is it even worth your time and your energy? There are disagreements that most certainly, when you come together with your spouse, for example, what are your parenting philosophies? A lot of times, people will go to the mat over this, and this is a huge disagreement into a family dynamic. Much the same over finances. How do you approach finances versus your spouse? When you are coming together, this could be a seriously contentious and very divisive topic, one that can cause a huge disagreement and many times actually ends in divorce. Tread lightly when it comes to those disagreements and consider what they actually are. All right. So moving on into our next slice of life, if you will, how do you handle disagreements at work? This is a multifaceted problem. But what I would say to the individual who's listening, because you want to build yourself, if you will, is that you want to build resiliency. In the many years that I have spent in the field working, the number of people who I have seen argue over insignificant things just because one person said something and the other person's pride was injured. It actually had very, very little to do with the actual point. It was because somebody said something in a manner with which somebody else was upset with. I had this last week on a job site. It was not the specific issue so much as it turned into someone's pride injured. So here are some words of advice when it comes to disagreements that have served me well and should serve you well. You cannot control how somebody acts. You cannot control how somebody talks to you. You cannot control how somebody may not, because there are personality conflicts. You just don't jive for whatever reason. I've had them. You have very little control in a lot of that arena. But the one thing that you do have control over is how you respond to it. Just because somebody is acting arrogantly, acting prideful, and is elevating their voice, yelling, whatever, does that mean that you have to reciprocate, that you have to do the same exact thing they're doing? The answer is no. And indeed, you are the better person for it. Aside from the fact that you haven't even raised your voice and your stress level, your handling of that disagreement, like I said in The Pursuit of Excellence, you never know who's watching. At work, you never know who's watching. You never know if somebody that is a supervisor is watching. You never know if there's you have no idea who's watching you. From the person up top to the apprentice that needs to be mentored and everywhere in between, you never know who's watching you and the way you're acting. Which I might add, you never know who's watching you when you're going back to the family part of it. You never know who's watching you there. Would to God everybody would consider that my kids just might be watching me the way I'm handling disagreements with my wife or my husband. I don't need to escalate the situation. So at work, there is no need to escalate the situation. Often, you can take a break, take a breather. You don't want to respond in as so much as within your power, which there is a lot that's actually within your power in the way that you respond. The last thing that you want to do, if you are really, truly trying to grow, is to respond in anger. And for those of you who are in an office, you type that nasty email up, hit send, and out it goes, and you can't recall it. Abraham Lincoln biographers tell a story where somebody was talking to Abe Lincoln and they felt highly disgruntled. And they were talking to him about all kinds of things that had been done to them, things that they felt they were wronged with. And Abraham Lincoln's advice was to write a letter. Write that person a letter. And then that person wrote it all out. And he said, does it feel better? And he said, yes. And he said, now burn it in the fire. Now, this obviously took this person by surprise. That's a master class in how to handle a disagreement. Get it out of the way. Don't respond in anger. And just contemplate on what has been said and respond in a proper way. Not in a prideful way. Not in an arrogant way. Not in a way that, quite frankly, you will look back on, most people do anyway. They look back on the way they reacted and wish they could take that moment back. When a moment of thoughtfulness can spare you a lifetime of regret. Last thing that I'll say about work. We're going to have to work for 40 years, some of us longer than that. Work can often be an unpleasant place. Oftentimes, I don't get a chance to pick who I'm working for. I don't get a chance to pick a lot of times the jobs that I'm going to have to do on a job site. I may not even get a choice to pick my crew at times. And there's so many different variables in there. But the one thing that I'm certainly capable of doing is deciding how I respond to any and all situations that come my way. And when I respond in what I'm going to call a more positive manner, what I'm effectively doing is I'm building upon my reputation. I'm adding to it. And people see you and people see that. Is this person like somebody that's tossed to and fro with the wind? Or is this person someone who stands tall and does not get swayed or tossed around easily? Again, these are little decisions that we make throughout our life that many of us end up ultimately regretting because we let a moment of anger over a disagreement ruin a reputation, either with a company or with a customer or whatever the case may be. When it comes to work, you cannot control a whole host of things like you can with family. I mean, you don't get to pick your family either, but there are numerous control mechanisms within the family dynamic that you have within your control. I can decide where I want to live and all that kind of stuff. Whereas work, I may get sent to this job, or I might have to go over here, or I might have to go over here. I don't get the chance to pick all the coworkers and all the various, things that might come up on a daily basis that can just totally derail your work life, if you will. But in the end, you get to pick how you respond to that. And that right there, the fact that you can pick how you respond, and when you choose right, not in anger, not in pride, not in, I want to always be right. I'm just going to de-escalate the situation. You have no idea who's watching and how the payback is. And quite frankly, how good your work life can actually be, because you're not interested in arguing over every single significant disagreement. Food for thought. Moving on to what I would say is a relatively new phenomenon. It's definitely within the past 10, 15 years, and that's social media. If I've covered our personal life, and that includes family, just weigh it all out in the balance, right? There's as many variables as there are opinions. There's no way that it can be covered in total. But weigh it out in the balance, you begin to think about all that stuff. Work is at least a third of your life. That's a significant amount. So with sleep being a third, with work being a third, and the rest of your quote unquote personal life, right, with friends and family, etc. Social media is a relatively new phenomenon. And social media is a very interesting dynamic, and it's going to be a little bit different in the way we engage family or work. Primarily because what happens with social media is that we tend to have keyboard warriors, people who would say things behind a keyboard typing that they would not say to someone's face. Ultimately, that stems from our unfortunate ability to dehumanize people. And that's what happens on social media. For example, it's very, very easy to argue with people, to have those disagreements. And we'll have those disagreements, and we'll go actually looking for those disagreements. And we're looking to argue, and we're looking to be proven right, and we're looking to just get our point across and make you, the listener, the reader, whatever, it's to make you understand me instead of the opposite. Instead of me trying to understand you. And that right there causes a lot of problems, because there's a lot of people who will say / write things from a social media perspective, or even argue over topics that they would not do in person. And the main reason, I believe, is because we dehumanize people when we're not in their presence. Will we have disagreements? Yes. And I don't think that disagreements come out on social media any more full force than during during political season, when tensions seem to be ramped up. And quite frankly, your buttons have just might been pushed by a bot, by something who doesn't, by a computer program that is just trying to stir the pot. And meanwhile, this disagreement, whatever it happens to be, right? It could be on a personal level, it could be on a rights level, it could be on a speech level, it could be on a political level, it could be on a financial, emotional, spiritual, whatever the topic happens to be. There is always the possibility that you are arguing with someone who doesn't even exist. You are just as likely, I think, to argue with somebody who does not care about a subject. All they want to do is to provoke you. And you're spending energy, and you're spending time, and you're spending resources that could be better spent somewhere else arguing with people over disagreements on social media. And we say things to other people because we dehumanize them. We don't have, and we don't engage in face-to-face conversations over serious issues. And even if we do, We don't do it with a measure of grace or a measure of humility and have a conversation with someone and just try to understand them. We may walk away doing the old saying, we agree to disagree. We try to vilify people. And nowhere, in my estimation, is that more prevalent than on social media. Social media is like money. It's amoral. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just something that human beings can use. But my goodness, does social media bring out the bad in a lot of people. And this is one of the things that people are very well aware of, and how negative it happens to be, and how negative and how it can be used for bullying and all kinds of other things over minute disagreements. Now, that's not to say that there aren't very large and very significant disagreements, because there are. But oftentimes, and this is a staple on this podcast, I say this routinely, oftentimes, whether it's the laptop that I'm recording this podcast episode on, another laptop, a cell phone, a tablet, whatever, we use these for entertainment instead of doing the research. If somebody offers you in the course of conversation facts that challenge what you have been talking about, do we take the time, and this is specifically on social media, but we can extrapolate this out to family or to coworkers. Do we take the time to check up on it, or do we just want to be right in our little disagreement bubble? I just want to be right. And to take it a step further, do we even care that they've taken the time and we want to learn something, that we want to be engaged or educated to be able to walk away and say, we agree to disagree? The vast majority of people, if they were honest with themselves, would say, no, I'm not going to check any other additional facts. I'm not going to do any research. I'm not going to check if my position has been challenged or you've given me new facts that maybe I need to rethink my position. The overwhelming majority, I would say, of individuals, and certainly those on social media, are not going to evaluate their position. And when you attack a person's position, if you even just offer up at a disagreement on social media about a person's position, oftentimes it's regarded as an attack on them. And the two are distinctly different. You can have a disagreement about something and still talk to the person. And at the end of the day, after all we've gone through, we've talked to our family, we've gone to work, we get on, our electronic devices, and we're looking through social media because almost nobody abstains totally. We spend energy and time getting all riled up, oftentimes over the most minute and insignificant issues. And sometimes it's with the people that if we were with them face to face, we'd enjoy their company. If it were me, and this is just free advice, obviously on this podcast, I'm going to spend as little time as possible arguing with somebody on social media. There are a few topics that I'd be willing to actually entertain a honest discussion. But the minute that it becomes uncivil, I'm checking out, because now I'm wasting my time and I'm not going to get anywhere. And there are enormous numbers of people who argue with other people. And again, some of them are even bots over the most ridiculous things. And we're not civil to each other anymore. We don't have face-to-face civil interactions and agree to disagree. So tread lightly on the social media disagreements. And I'll end off with what I think are what's probably in your mind. If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably in your mind. Well, what about the hot button topics? What about those topics that even if we do agree to disagree, we just cannot come to any kind of close thing. We can't come to any kind of median line where we're meeting in the middle. There's just no way that this is going to happen. And I'm fully well aware that there are specific and certain topics that will get us there. First off, I would say, oftentimes we confuse a lot of insignificant issues with these more robust, these robust national conversation pieces that are indeed oftentimes hot button topics. And they often become obscured with the thousands of insignificant disagreements that we have on a routine basis. They get lost in the quagmire. They're obscured. They don't get to stand alone because we make mountains out of molehills. So first off, ascertain whether or not the disagreement is indeed petty, or is it a hot button topic that you're just not going to see eye to eye with somebody else on. And I don't even need to tell you what those are. Many of you know what they are. It's part of the national conversation that we continually have. So that would be the first thing that I would say about a hot button topic. The second one I would say is it, regarding social media, is it even worth debating? Because we dehumanize. I'm not so sure. I think far better off, if you really want to have a conversation with people and change people's minds, one-on-one conversation or face-to-face. Let's talk. It could be one person talking to multiple people, but you need, my goodness, do you need that personal interaction? Because you need something to overcome the serious pettiness that we often bring into our disagreements. At this point, I'm not even saying that you need to try and understand their point. They just need to be humanized once again. We can't even try to begin to understand their point if we don't even see them as another human being with value, which is so often the case. We don't see other people that have value. All we see is somebody to conquer with our idea, and we won't even take the time to try to understand where they're coming from to say agree to disagree. We're still not going to talk about this hot button topic, or we need to talk more. Lastly, if you are passionate enough about your hot button topic, and you might be passionate about numerous ones, tread lightly about how you engage other people with them. Are you a good conversationalist? Can you present your talking points and then listen to them? Can you understand that they might be throwing in X, Y, and Z stumbling blocks to what you're talking about, and they have a different perspective? Now, I'm not saying right or wrong at this particular point. There's a whole myriad of topics that are usually hot button issues on the national conversation. What I'm saying is, do we do the hard work to try to understand people? The usual answer is no if we're honest with ourselves, because it is indeed hard work. And of course, we want to be right. But you never know who's watching, you never know who's listening, and you never know whose mind you might change because you attempted to at least humanize that person again and try and understand their perspective or their point of view. I may never agree with you, but if I can walk away and at least you see me as a human being and you respect me, you may not agree with me, but you respect me, then I feel like the conversation was not in vain. And that's what we need today. When it comes to disagreements, we need to have conversations. And that ends the podcast episode of how we handle disagreements. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.